Hello, Space Junkies, and welcome to What a Piece of Junk, episode number 122. We are the Star Wars podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network, and joining me for this episode is my original Wookiee co pilot, the Gooey Chewy, our very own Dave Filclone, Mr. Miracle, the man of 1,000 nicknames. It's Nathan Miracle. Nathan, how's it going?
It is going well. Big changes in my personal life. I am under new employment since last time we spoke, which is kind of a testament to how long it's been since we've spoken, because I've actually been in that job for a couple weeks now.
But that also means that you are technically under new management because you have a new manager.
That is true. That's absolutely true. And I'm in the exact same sphere of employment, just one town over. But I'm greatly enjoying it, so I'm doing really well. How about you, Scott? How's it going for you?
I'm doing pretty well myself. Mita and I continue to see project progression being made on our dome house that we're having built over here in North Carolina, which is really cool. And astute observers who are watching the video of this will see that she's hanging out behind me right now, painting some Warhammer 40K miniatures. So how cool is that? In fact, I think there's one Tyranid model that she's already finished that I can show the camera somewhere. Haha, yes. This small but intimidating Tyranid warrior waits eagerly to eat some of my Space Marines for lunch. Nom, 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 nom.
Well, not to be outdone, I have painted Frank Castle, the Cosmic Ghost Rider, today.
Wow. You did a really good job painting his helmet clear.
Yes, that was very difficult. I had to not put it on until I was done.
Hey, man, restraint is an important part of artistic endeavors.
It really is. I had a lot of fun painting this. I'm going to be super honest here. Mita's better at this than I am, but I have fun.
Well, she does have an art degree, but you know what? She would say that you do a great job, and like you said, the important part is that you're having fun.
See, I have an accounting degree, so I paint by numbers.
You paint by... Get out. I'm pushing the eject button on the Drunken Gungan. Oh, what do you know? It doesn't actually function. What a shock.
Yeah, I sabotaged that.
Oh, well, in that case. Well, anyway, the Drunken Gungan aside and various other malfunctions or sabotages, I'm sure that the listeners out there are all, this isn't a painting Warhammer Marvel Whatchamadoodle podcast. Talk about Star Wars. So that's what we're going to do. Although we don't have a whole lot to talk about, and sadly, we might have a subject that says we're going to have even less to talk about in the future, based on what Overlord at the House of Mouse, Mr. Bob Iger, had to say earlier this week. But we'll get to that after we have some more fun and interesting discussion about the latest trailer for the forthcoming Ahsoka series. And Nathan, I know as Dave Filclone, you're tapped into the network of Daves. You want to give some predictions about what you think will happen in Ahsoka. So we should probably do that this episode as well. But first,
absolutely.
The most recent trailer, dare I say the final trailer? It might be the final trailer.
I think so. The show comes out on August 23rd, so we are just barely over a month away from seeing it. So I don't think that we will get any more trailers before then. We might get some more teaser information, but probably not an entire trailer. Or if we do, it'll be just a remix of things that we've seen up to this point with very little new information.
I have to say, one of my favorite things about the latest trailer is there is a scene where Ahsoka talks about how Thrawn is coming to be heir to the Empire. And I leaned over to Mita and did my Family Guy riff. I like the part of the show when I say the name of the show. And then I realized, wait a minute, that's not actually the name of the show. But you know what? It still works.
They're going to say the name of the show a lot because every time somebody mentions Ahsoka, they're saying the name of the show.
Yeah, that's true. I might go hoarse doing that routine with Ahsoka. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
Don't.
Yeah. I did get to do that yesterday when I took Mita to see Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 because somebody says Dead Reckoning in like the first 5 minutes of the movie. And I was all like, hey! And she was like, quiet, I'm trying to listen.
Good on her, because in the movie theater, no talking.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. And there
Usually,
was actually
depends
a
on what you're
decent
watching.
crowd. There were several more people in the theater with us, which these days recently we go to see movies and there's like nobody else at the cinema. But this was opening weekend for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. And so there were plenty of people in the theater with us. And it was a good flick.
Yeah, it's been a little hit or miss for me recently. I've gone to see several movies recently because we had The Flash.
Mhm.
We had some other movies. I'm sure I remember that.
Have you gone to see the new Indiana Jones?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Well, there's
Uh,
that one. Yeah.
that one. Went to see Air this year, the
Okay.
Michael Jordan movie.
Hmm.
Um, and it's been kind of hit or miss as to how crowded the theater has been. Of course, I did have a 2 week span between jobs. So my last day at one job was June 16th, and then it was 2 weeks before my new job. So Andrea and I went a couple of times, like midday on a Friday, and
Yeah.
there's
See, you
fewer
weren't
people there.
unemployed. You were fun employed.
I really
Huh?
was because I had the new job lined up already. It wasn't a matter of, oh no, I lost my job. It was a matter of, I am ending this job to start the new one. I'm just
Yeah.
ending it early to have a little bit of a fun time. So yes, it was very much being fun employed for a couple of weeks.
Good times. Good times. Well, speaking of being fun employed and changing jobs, this series of Ahsoka is, of course, about Ahsoka not being fulcrum anymore for the rebels because the Empire has fallen, but rather now she is trying to convince the New Republic that they need to take the whole threat of Thrawn and the remnant of the Empire seriously. So we see a little bit of that happening in the trailer, and she is assisted in this effort by one Hera Syndulla, who is also there trying to convince the New Republic to take these guys seriously. And
Mhm.
she's essentially, Hera, that is now fully embracing her new job of being a warmonger, if you will. Nathan, you were talking about some of Hera's comments about war earlier.
Yes, well, in Balin too, because Balin starts off, and Balin is Ray Stevenson's character,
Mhm.
the big guy with the orange lightsaber, and it is orange. Dave Filoni has confirmed this,
Mhm. Mhm.
but he is definitely on the dark side. Um,
Yes.
just perhaps not quite Sith, but he
Right.
was talking about how war wasn't good for anything, or what was it good for? Absolutely not. No. He was saying the exact opposite. There's always war. And Hera talked about how she had been in war all her life and she's trying to stop this new war. And that speech sounded very halting to me. It really felt like they were splicing together two different conversations.
Yeah, and they may very well have been. We know how Hollywood likes to do that with trailers these days. And I say these days, probably the last 20 years, they've been doing that. And I wonder if that's one of the things that the Writers Guild and, by extension, the Screen Actors Guild is disgruntled about
It's
when they're on
yeah,
strike right now. Could be, because, I mean, no writer wants to see the dialogue that they created chopped up and rearranged like that.
yeah. And honestly, it's not great for the fans either because you go into these things expecting certain lines of dialogue, and when they're out of context or they're cut up and they end up meaning different things, it's it's kind of a rug pull, and that's
Yeah.
not good. There is such a thing as defying the audience's expectations in such a way that you give them a better story, but there's also just giving them wrong expectations just to mess with them. And
Yeah.
that one's not good.
Although I know that some fans have complained in the past decade about writers changing things just so that they can, be disruptive or undermine audience expectation, or even accusing some writers, especially in ongoing series like Ahsoka is going to be, of reacting to audience predictions or whatnot by changing the story in seemingly nonsensical ways just to be, haha, nobody saw that coming. But that's not actually a new phenomenon. In fact, it predates Hollywood, predates television, predates radio. The most ancient, if you will, example of that we have recorded is one Charles Dickens. when he was doing his stories released in newsletters printed, by old school printing press over the course of months. There were people who were printing their own episode 3 of Dickens's work to hand out to people on the street for two pence, 2 shillings, instead of the 5 shillings that the actual newspaper cost. And so Dickens found out about that and was so upset that he got their fake endings, read them, and made sure that he didn't write what they had written as their fake endings, because the concept
Wow.
of copyright and whatnot was not a thing at that point in time in Victorian England. And so Dickens was out there doing his serialized adventures and making sure that he didn't write what people were expecting to happen, because the bootleggers had already done their own fake endings, or fake part 2, fake part 3. It's crazy to think how much things change and yet they remain the same.
Well, to go even further back, King Arthur, a lot of
Mhm.
the legends surrounding King Arthur are basically fan fiction.
Yes.
The whole idea of Lancelot was totally a self-insert character. There's pretty much no coherent canon for
Yeah.
King Arthur, because there's been so much. Oh, I'm going to write a King Arthur story, and
Mhm.
as you said, the idea of intellectual property wasn't really a thing. So
Right.
whatever you wanted to write
Yeah,
got
if I
written.
remember correctly, I think it's Le Mort to Arthur, the most famous Arthur tale about when he actually gets killed, um, doesn't involve Lancelot at all. And like Lancelot's not any part of that story. I think that's right. Somebody is listening to this episode going, "No, Scott, you moron! Of course Lancelot's in that story." But anyway, apologies to any Arthur fans out there if I got that wrong, and Lancelot is in that. But I believe it's the traditional understanding of Lancelot and the betrayal and the affair with Guinevere and whatnot was more focused on the beginning of Arthur's story, whereas Le Mort to Arthur is pretty much the
It's
ending
the
of
end.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but I could be wrong. Now I'm gonna have to look that up while you pontificate about Ahsoka trailer stuff.
All right. Well, I can pontificate away, and there's plenty of things to pontificate about. And I'm going to start off with the scene that has Sabine and Ahsoka meeting in front of the painting, because I believe that that scene is the exact same scene that we got at the end of Rebels. Now, there
Yeah,
are a couple of slight differences. The color of Ahsoka's cloak is different. It's more gray than white, which could be a big deal, because Dave Filoni has talked about how Ahsoka is kind of a Gandalf figure, and the difference between gray and white when you're talking about Gandalf is pretty big.
huge, huge.
So I'm not sure what's going on with that, but then again, this may be another instance of editing to where the Ahsoka that we see there isn't necessarily the one that's facing Sabine at the moment. But we do see the painting, and the painting looks identical. It's clearly the same place. And Ahsoka mentions Sabine's hair, so I think it's just been cut. I think it is the exact same scene, just seen in live action. We do also see Ahsoka with, not Ahsoka, Sabine with long hair, presumably right before that, flying or riding on Lothal on one of their highways, and diving underneath an E-wing, something which I'm not sure that we've seen in live action before.
I don't think so, but definitely animated, but and video games,
Video
but
game,
not.
lots of video
Yeah,
games.
yeah.
So that's cool. We also get an image of Sabine cutting off her hair, and that really reminded me of a particular scene in another Dave Filoni work, although it happened after Dave Filoni exited this show, on Avatar: The Last Airbender, when Iroh and Zuko are on the run from the Fire Nation. One of the first things they do is they cut off their top knots,
Mhm.
because that represents royalty. So
Yeah.
they're going into hiding, and it had a very similar feel to it.
It also felt to me a little bit like this was Sabine committing herself to going on mission. Like she's
Mhm.
now serious. This it's almost like she's cutting her hair to show that she's taking an oath to be focused on this new quest to go find
Yes.
Ezra.
Yes, I think that's exactly what's going on. So I think we won't see her with long hair for very long. I think that's going to be the first episode we see her lose her hair. Um,
Right.
but we also find out that she can fight with a green lightsaber.
Yes, and that green lightsaber is vaguely reminiscent of the one that that Ezra essentially had before he disappeared.
Yeah, so it's unclear as to whether he left it there or what exactly happened. Maybe this is after they find Ezra, so maybe she's retrieved it. I still like the idea that we get Ezra's clone at some point, although there's nothing in the trailer to indicate that that's going to happen.
Right.
But lack of evidence isn't an evidence of lack. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Could still
also,
happen.
Here's my personal theory about Sabine having the green lightsaber. I think she makes her own. I think she had made her own at some point between the last time we saw her in Rebels pre Return of the Jedi and the time we see her in Rebels and here, where it's all post Return of the Jedi. Because we learned that Ahsoka was training Sabine on how to do stuff here in this trailer. Because Sabine says something. What's the line?
So they're talking about how Ahsoka left Anakin just like I left Sabine. And then
Yes.
later we also get a line where Sabine calls Ahsoka master.
Right. She kind of almost does it derogatorily or like snidely. Yeah.
So Derek, as soon as this trailer dropped, put something in our chat about how apparently Sabine is force sensitive or at least force attuned. We had a whole discussion as to what her ability ranking would be with the force
in the old Star Wars CCG from Decipher. Yes. And I took the opportunity to craft a custom version of the American Chopper meme where the old man is yelling at his son about what is happening. And so it's Derek and I arguing about what ability rating that Sabine should have. And I basically tell him, of course she should be ability 3. That makes her the perfect target for Jedi tests. And I'm going to do that. And I'm going to have Ahsoka be her mentor.
Which, if they come up with a way to do that in the card game, that would be cool. But I don't think that's what's happening in the show. I don't think Sabine is force sensitive. I do think that she's attuned to the force, kind of like I think Han Solo is attuned to the force. Characters who always seem to be lucky, like Jar Jar, it's often kind of the force guiding their actions without them really knowing, even though they're not attuned enough. They're not sensitive enough to the force to learn the Jedi arts. I think that's kind of where Sabine is, which would make her ability 3 in the card game. So that's right. I agree with you. Not 4,
Booyah.
3. 4 is when you start pulling lightsabers out of people's pockets.
Yep. Well, and but we've seen that Sabine is able to use the Darksaber much more efficiently than Din Djarin is able to. So, as I agree, there are varying levels of connectivity to the Force, and I think that Sabine is more connected to the Force than Din is. She's not Jedi level or Sith level, if you will, but she's definitely more so than Din Djarin because that's part of the reason why he struggles with the Darksaber every so often. Actually, more than every so often. He frequently struggles with the Darksaber.
Only about once every time he ignites it.
Yeah.
So, always.
Yeah. All right. Well, for those keeping track at home, Lancelot is, in fact, in La Morte d'Arthur. I just engaged my Google Foo and was able to find that. But importantly, in that collection of Arthurian tales, Lancelot's story with Guinevere happens a lot later in life than it does in the traditional telling. So that's probably what I was thinking of, is that it isn't like immediately when he shows up and she swoons over him, etc. Okay, anyway, as much as there is a lot of Arthurian legend interwoven within Star Wars, I'm going to stay on topic for once in my podcast career and continue talking about the Ahsoka trailer. I think in addition to all that revelation about Sabine and her possibility of Force training under Ahsoka, I also enjoy the fact that we got some confirmation that Huyang, the droid, would leave the planet that he was on and go with them on a starship, because we see there's a scene of him in a starship with them.
And this lends credence to your idea that Sabine has built her own lightsaber, because Huyang is the droid who helps younglings build their lightsabers. So he may have helped Sabine build a lightsaber. Now, usually they build the lightsabers with the Force, but I don't see why that's necessarily a requirement.
Well, and they don't have to build them there on what planet is it? The name has totally escaped
Well,
me.
Ilum is the planet where they usually get the crystals, but they usually build them on the ship on the way back to Coruscant.
Okay. Yeah.
And
So what I'm saying is, I know that I feel pretty confident they're going to Ilum to pick up Huyang, or Yang, however you pronounce that guy's name.
David Tennant.
Yes, David Tennant. They're going to pick up David Tennant. But they don't necessarily have to go to Ilum to find him. I mean, it would be cool to see live action Ilum. But, at this point in time, David Tennant could be on some other planet.
Well, and he tended to hang out on the ship, not on a given planet. So they could have just found him in space.
Yeah.
It's also I'm wondering
like I said last time, it's cool to see a droid with a name instead of numerical designation.
Yeah, that is true. I wonder if he was supposed to be involved at all with the Skeleton Crew show that I'm not sure is still happening.
Oh no, Skeleton Crew is happening. They finished filming it before the strikes took into effect. So
it's hard to keep straight what is or is not happening now.
Right, and he could definitely still be on both shows. We could see him on Skeleton Crew. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, though, if Skeleton Crew happened first, if that might explain how he got to where he is in this show. But, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time Star Wars has done things in non-chronological order.
Indeed. So we may see...
the 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9.
We may see Huyang be on Ahsoka doing stuff off-planet. And then in Skeleton Crew, we'll see some episode where they're like, oh, we have to go and fix this droid who's been around forever that is friends with the Jedi,
Could be.
That'd be kind of cool, actually. So we see that Hera is there. Mary Elizabeth Winstead is there talking to Mon Mothma and them. Pretty cool to see the same Mon Mothma actress from Andor. So that's good to know that they're embracing the whole idea and reinforcing the whole idea that Mon Mothma lives through Return of the Jedi. And she is around to see the collapse of the Empire and the rise of the New Republic. Nice to see her efforts paying off. So when we see Hera talking to her, or at least a hologram of her, and some other senators, Nathan, what do you think Hera is trying to convince the government to do that they don't want to do?
I think the government does not believe that Thrawn is back. Or if he is, they believe that Thrawn is not a threat. So what they want to do is absolutely nothing. They want to squabble amongst themselves about things that are not actually all that important, and don't want to defend the Republic. And we get a line about once a rebel, always a rebel. I think we might start seeing the beginning of the resistance here. This is something I always found a little confusing in episode 7. We have the Republic, but then we have the resistance. The Republic is the government. The resistance is almost a rebel affiliation within the Republic, but they're not rebelling against the Republic.
Yes, they're rebelling against some other. It's almost like they're paramilitary. I thought a lot about the resistance. A couple of weeks ago, here in the real world, there was a group of Russian mercenaries who were opposed to Vladimir Putin and his ruling of Russia, or at the very least opposed to the way the official military in Russia was being run during the war in Ukraine. And it was called the Wagner Group, or Wagner Group, if you will. And they're a group of mercenaries that are operatives of the Russian government so that they can officially deny them, right? I thought about the resistance and how, from the First Order's perspective, Leia and her crew would be a group of mercenaries supported clandestinely by the New Republic. And in fact, in episode 7, General Hux sort of talks about that. about how the resistance is a bunch of terrorists that are being funded by the government, even though the government looks the other way, because he's trying to poo-poo the New Republic, which is a
but he
fascinating.
kind of has a point.
Yes, I'm about to say, which
He's
is a
not
fascinating
wrong.
take on him being almost a slimy and squirrely, lawyery type of villain, in that he is technically correct, which is the best
That's
kind
of correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
it's the old traditional, the dark side tells you the truth.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
just in such a way as to frame it as though the good guys are bad.
Yes, yes. I would have liked to have seen, and I'm pretty sure comic book wise, this did happen in the sequel era. More of that storyline where people, because a lot of it was done, hinted at, and even sometimes blatantly talked about in the Poe Dameron comic series from Marvel that was coming out back around 2014, 2015, 2016. When the sequel era was hot and heavy, and everybody wanted to know more about those characters. Marvel did a Poe Dameron series of comics, which was actually pretty good. And Poe had to go around defending the actions of the resistance, or in some cases, defending the New Republic, since he was an official X-Wing pilot in the official Army/Navy, however you refer to that, of the New Republic during that time frame. It was before he really, dropped off the radar and joined the resistance full time. It was also somewhat hinted at when they had Oscar do the voice for Poe Dameron on the Star Wars Resistance cartoon show that was on Disney Plus for a while, or Disney Channel for a while. And they had him come and do the voice while he was teaching one of the other young members of the cast to fly their ship better.
Yeah, Kazuda.
Yes.
Speaking of Kazuda, I heard something. I did not catch this myself, so I cannot take credit for it. But I heard from New Rockstars that one of the people in that conference on the holograms is Kazuda's dad.
Oh, cool.
Which I don't know that that's true, but I think it is.
Yeah,
I don't
that could
have a
make
reason
sense.
to doubt them, and it does make sense. He was an important member of the Republic. This was a source of conflict between him and Kazuda in the Resistance cartoon, because he was very much yay Republic, boo Resistance, and Kazuda being the main character of a show called Resistance. You
Yes,
can
and
guess
being
where
friends with Poe Dameron.
yeah, you can guess where his loyalties lied on that. So yeah,
And
I
then,
would
of
not be
course, there's
surprised.
an episode. Yeah, there's an episode of Resistance right after Starkiller Base does its thing, and blows up the Hosnian Prime system, where he finds out that his parents are one of the many, many millions of casualties as a result of the Starkiller Base weapon blasting that whole system out of existence.
Yeah. So I think we are going to see kind of the beginnings of the Resistance. We might see the beginnings of the First Order as well, but I'm not as sure about that. It depends how much is Thrawn involved with the First Order, or is he his own separate Imperial faction? Because the opening crawl to Episode 7 talked about how there were a lot of Imperial warlords vying for control of the Imperial remnants, and the First Order is the one that kind of won out.
Yeah.
Do they win out in part because Ahsoka stops Thrawn? Or is Thrawn, the big brain guy who's figured
he's
out
the
a
whole
way?
reason that they win. Yeah.
Right. It's one or the other, I'm sure. But I don't know which. So
Oh
that'll
man,
be
it would be really elegant writing if Ahsoka's defeat of Thrawn is the reason that the First Order and Kylo Ren all happen. Wow.
Yeah.
That would be very elegant writing if that turns out to be the case. Because then
It
Ahsoka
really
will
could.
have been responsible for helping to form Vader and helping to form Vader's most powerful disciple in the case of Kylo Ren.
Yep.
Whoa.
See, it's like poetry. It rhymes.
There's a ring that's
It's a
going to goes
ring.
around it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, if any of those things do happen on Ahsoka, you can guarantee that we will take credit for them in a future episode of the podcast. Yes.
I've got one more thing I've got to point out before we move on. So we see the two characters with the orange lightsabers there's one more character that we never see their face who looks like an Inquisitor and has an Inquisitor's lightsaber, the red spinning one.
The big circle. Yeah, the ring. Yep.
And I have speculation on who this is. Now, I did mention that I watched New Rockstar's thing. I think it is who they said it is, but I had this thought before I saw their video. So
Sure. No, I believe you.
I had this thought actually last Thursday, and I can tell you why. I went to the game store, and there were some people. I went to the game store to pick up this guy, and there were some people playing Shatterpoint, and one of them was playing with Barriss Offee, and we started talking about how just how rude Luminara was in the game. And I pointed out, well, actually, the character on your team who's really rude is Barriss Offee. I mean, she went around blowing up entire buildings. She's rude. And we started talking about how we don't actually know what happened to her. The last we saw her, she was taken into custody, but we never find out what happened to her after that. I think it's possible that the Inquisitor-looking character is Barriss Offee.
Whoa. That would be wild.
We have no confirmation that she's dead.
Right.
We have no confirmation of what happened to her. She clearly turned away from the Jedi, so she wouldn't have been around clones to be Order 66ed.
Yes. Not that you have to necessarily die if you are around clones during Order 66, but
That's true.
I've ranted about that enough times on this show.
It seems very likely that she would have been taken in as an Inquisitor, and we don't see her in Rebels or in Obi-Wan, but there can be more Inquisitors than what we saw. So I think that this is an Inquisitor or someone who was an Inquisitor up until the fall of the Empire, and it's Barriss Offee.
Cool.
That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
That'd be a nice deep cut. I kind of like that.
It would be a deep cut, but it's someone who has personal stakes with Ahsoka.
Yeah, definitely. And we know that they want to lean into Ahsoka's Clone Wars past. So that's pretty cool.
Ashley Eckstein has said that I think it might have been Rosario Dawson. One of the Ahsokas has said that if you go into the Ahsoka show without having watched Clone Wars and Rebels, you will be missing out. Now, I don't think that means that you won't be able to enjoy the show, but I do think it means that there's a lot of information that will be relevant, that will enhance the show if you know it. And of course, after each episode, we will be there to tell you all of the information that you needed to have better context for the show.
Absolutely. And right now, we're going to hear about other places you can listen to on the Fandom Podcast Network to get context for the shows that they talk about.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blood of Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our fandom flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek and the Orville Show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
All right. Thank you very much, Kevin. We hope you guys will check out some of those other shows. Nathan, before we wrap up this episode of our mind himself, Bob Iger, talking about how Disney is going to be slowing it down a bit when it comes to producing movies and TV shows for its Lucasfilm franchises, and he also said for its Marvel Studios projects. Bob Iger said to CNBC on Thursday, the move comes as the company is looking to cut costs during a time when its recent films, be they Marvel or animated series or animated fare, have underwhelmed at the box office. Iger says, quote, you pull back not just to focus, but also as part of our cost containment initiative, spending less on what we make and making less. Earlier this year, Disney rolled out a broad reorganization of the business that included $5.5 billion, that's billion with a B, in cost cutting, of which $3 billion would be slashed from content production, excluding sports. So they're not touching the budget for NFL and whatnot type production. So Bob's main point here is that he feels there is a bit of franchise fatigue when it comes to Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and then, of course, all the Marvel stuff. Now, we won't take our time to talk much about Marvel fatigue because we've got a whole other shows to talk about that here on the network. But as far as a Star Wars fatigue goes, what do you think? Is Iger off his rocker here? Or is he kind of right, or somewhere in the middle?
I think he's kind of right. I would, for Star Wars, probably put it somewhere in the middle. Here's the weird thing. I think there's Star Wars television show fatigue, Star Wars streaming fatigue, because we've gotten a lot of streaming shows recently, but we haven't gotten a movie since Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah.
And I think we're ready for a new movie. We're not ready for a whole bunch more television shows. At the last Disney day, the last time they announced a whole bunch of stuff, they announced a whole slate of television shows. So many that I don't remember them all now.
Right.
Some of them have been taken off the table. Some of them are still on the table, but we have no idea when we'll get them. I didn't even remember Skeleton Crew still being on the table. I don't know how much I care about Skeleton Crew at the moment.
Right. Yeah.
Which, for someone like me to say, I'm not sure I care about this Star Wars product, but it's not like, granted, they had the aimed at 2 and 3 year old product on Disney Plus recently.
Yes.
I get me not caring about that, but for an animated show, or a Disney Plus show, live action show, for me to say I'm not that interested, yeah, that probably tells you there's a lot more people out there who don't care.
Yeah, that's a really bad sign because we are pretty hardcore. Not only have we been Star Wars fans for decades now, but the product we buy, merchandise, we subscribe to just about everything. We play an MMO about Star Wars that is itself more than 10 years old. We do a podcast about Star Wars. We play countless other Star Wars games. Ooh,
we do Star Wars Legos.
Speaking of merch, that looks awesome.
Thank you. This is my second helmet. My first one.
So that is
Rex.
Luke Skywalker's Red 5 helmet, right?
Yes, is specifically Luke Skywalker's. It has the emblems that he had. Even has a little talkie stick here where
comms link. Yeah.
Yep. So it's pretty cool, but not as stable as the Clone Trooper ones. So I'm going to put this back down. But yeah, the point is well made. We're the type of fans who buy the stuff.
Yeah, and so we have Skeleton Crew coming out that we kind of don't know very much about, and the two of us haven't really sought out more information about it. Secondly, The Acolyte is coming, which was hailed as a real groundbreaking idea, but a very female forward cast. I would say
which sounds
Ahsoka
really
is a very
cool.
female forward cast. Yeah,
You've got Hera, Sabine, Ahsoka as the main
hmm
characters, really.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm excited for the Acolyte whenever it comes out, but I have no idea when it's going to come out. So I think there
right.
is some fatigue in part just from announcing so much stuff so far in advance of when we're actually going to get it.
Mhm.
There's only so much hype that you can maintain for that period of time.
Right.
So, yeah, once we get to the end of these things, we don't care. And the same thing has happened with Marvel. I don't want to go
Yeah.
too deep into Marvel because, as you said, we have other shows. Check them out. But it's happening there too, where they've announced so far out. They've announced phases out. I just don't care
Yeah.
that far forward because I can't care for that long a period of time.
I think that franchise fatigue is real for Star Wars right now. I know a lot of people on the internet have said that it isn't that there's too much Star Wars or too much Marvel, even. It's that the current Star Wars and the current Marvel are not as good as the earlier ones in Disney's tenure, and that may be partially true. However, I think that the two things are interrelated. We
Bingo.
have a diluted quality because we have so much of a broader scheme of stuff being produced. And so the reason that you feel that Secret Invasion isn't nearly as good as Infinity War is because there's been so much other stuff that happened that Secret Invasion has to sort of piggyback on, and also, more importantly, perhaps, make sure that they acknowledge and stay aware of in their storytelling. And the more interconnected you make all of your products, all of your projects, the harder it is for writers to have original and well-paced drama because they have too many boxes they have to check instead of having free reign to tell the story they want to tell. And I think that's actually part of the reason that some people complained so much about the sequel trilogy is because it had a lot of boxes to check about stuff that people were expecting to happen, or if not expecting to happen, at least make sure that they acknowledge and piggyback off of, even if nothing else, the original trilogy. One of the
Yes.
greatest things about Star Wars when it first came out in the 20th century was how original it felt because so many things that used to be written that way were not done that way anymore, and it was a blank slate. And so much of a blank slate that George Lucas just sort of made a nebulous, cloudy past from which to spring the current action. And he became so famous for that he had a whole technique named after him almost, with the in media res, we begin in the middle, right? And so of course he wasn't the first writer to do that.
Well,
You
I
can't
mean, that's as old as the epics. This is older than King Arthur. This is going
Yeah.
back to Odysseus and
Right. I was going to say we can't act like Lucas was being Mr. Original on a podcast episode where we already talked about Arthur and Charles Dickens. So, anyway, but yes, the point is well made though that in Hollywood, George Lucas is the guy that is sort of credited with doing films in that way. I think I can say that he really popularized the idea of making motion pictures written in that manner, because certainly Dickens and Odysseus and Ulysses and all them didn't do motion pictures. Or did they? Cue Ancient Aliens theme.
I'm going to go with no on that.
Anyway, so yes, I think Iger is probably onto something here, that Disney as a corporation needs to dial it back. They need to slow down their productions. And of course, it doesn't hurt him to be saying this right now because he gave this interview knowing full well that a writer's strike is in full swing, and at that time, a actor's strike was right on the horizon. And here we are on July the 16th of 2023, and we have both writers and actors on strike. And I think, isn't there still a Producers Guild of America strike as well? Isn't the PGA still on strike? While I check on that, you can tell us what you think is going to come as a result of Iger's decision.
Well, I think a lot of the shows that have been announced will be quietly dismissed, and I don't think they're going to announce anything else until they're really sure that they're making it. The thing that does concern me about what he said was that they're going to be spending less and also make less. So I'm hoping that that doesn't mean that they're going to kind of cheap out on what they're still making. because I think you're exactly right that right now part of the problem is they're putting out so much quantity, they don't have the quality. I don't want them to cut the quantity without also making the quality better. Because that's what needs to happen, is the quality needs to go up. And again, this is not just Star Wars. This is also Marvel. I think you make a good point with how interconnected things have to be nowadays. And yet at the same time, they're trying to silo certain things. Secret Invasion, I think, is a great example of that, where they're trying to stuff all of Secret Invasion into one 6-episode series, like almost like a mini series. In the comics, Secret Invasion was this huge thing that covered everything. It really needed to be its own phase. But because they're trying to get so many different storylines in, it got relegated to just one show. And it's too rushed. You can't have the big reveals that you need to be able to have for a true Secret Invasion. Not as good.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that doesn't happen with Star Wars. And I think it might not, in part because they don't have storylines that they have to do. They're not pulling from comics. They get to have that. They get to make their own source material. So I think that is an advantage Star Wars has, and that I think that might be why we've seen a little less fatigue in Star Wars than we have in Marvel. But it's still happening.
Yeah, totally. And I think part of it is fatigue in general for the idea of streaming services as a content delivery system, because be it Marvel, Star Wars, Star Trek, hello Paramount Plus, sometimes I feel like I don't know what to watch because I have 17 things that I know I quote need to watch this week. Sometimes I don't relish the idea of doing an episode of the podcast because I felt like I didn't watch all of the Star Wars stuff I needed to watch that week to be prepared to fully discuss it properly.
Especially when they cross over and you've got two different two different shows going at once. Yeah.
Yeah, to say nothing of how I might feel if I was just a fan who didn't have a podcast, but I would go down to the comic shop every week, or the coffee shop, or to my local fan club meeting, or whatever it might be, and I can't discuss things with everybody because I haven't seen every last second of every episode that came out this week because I lost track of which streaming service that it was on. And like some people in the 1990s would tell me that I treated Star Trek or Star Wars too much like it was a religion. In fact, Futurama had a whole episode about how in the future Star Trek had almost become its own religion and they had big wars about it. That's why they outlawed discussion of the show on Earth in that whole episode where they went to the Head in a Jar museum and they talked to all the original series casts whose heads were still in jars. And they couldn't mention the word Star Trek, but then they got them all onto a ship and took them to a planet where they could talk about it, and they got their bodies back. Anyway, very great episode. As always, Futurama was prescient about the whole idea of being a fan of Star Trek, or in our case, Star Wars, moved well beyond a choice in entertainment and became a lifestyle, and then moved beyond that and became a religion. And so I think that too much of a good thing is what's happening with streaming services, and it's pushing it well past all the things my friends in the 90s were complaining to me about when I got too obsessed with this or that franchise. Because man, if they could see me now, it'd be insane. Or maybe it is insane. Anyway,
maybe it is.
I think that the strikes with the writers and the actors are going to help diffuse a lot of this. I think that so many studios and so many production companies are going to have to reformulate as they spend more and more time realizing that movies and TV shows are not the primary form of entertainment for young people anymore. People my age and your age are, waiting with bated breath to see what's going to happen with all the actors and stuff, to see whether or not our favorite shows are going to continue to come out on streaming services, or movies in movie theaters are going to continue to happen. But I think the studios have all started to learn that they don't make nearly as much money as they used to, because young people don't do this stuff as their primary entertainment anymore. They're either out there experiencing stuff on their own, they're creating their own content on streaming services like Twitch or Kick or YouTube. YouTube probably makes me sound like a geezer to most of the young people out there right now. Or they're watching other content creators on those services, Or more to the point, they're playing video games and doing virtual reality stuff. They don't sit and passively watch anything anymore. They do stuff as their form of entertainment.
Yeah, even when they're watching somebody on Twitch, there's a chat going on, and you're talking to other people who are watching the same thing at the same time, potentially even interacting with the content creator. And that's something you can't get on a streaming service. Right. It's something that you can't get. You say that we sound like geezers because we talk about YouTube. Let me sound like a real geezer. I remember way back in the last millennium when if you wanted to watch a television show, you needed to set an alarm and have the TV on to the right channel at the right time. Because if you missed it, you were not going to see it again until they put it on a rerun.
Yeah.
Which
my mom had
that was.
Yes, if you're lucky, it would have been later that year. If you're unlucky, you would have had to wait till like the next summer.
If you were really lucky, I remember I love Top Chef. I remember when I first started watching Top Chef, they would run last week's episode right before the current week's episode. So if I missed a week, I got 2 hours of Top Chef the next week.
Yeah, you could get caught up because the network was being quote unquote kind to you, but now.
Yeah, the network didn't have something for that time slot is what it was.
Right. Yes, exactly. Quote unquote, they're being kind. I remember my mom, God rest her soul, talking about how much she loved when my father bought our first VCR because my sister and I were still young enough. We were both less than 10 years old. And my mom was so happy because it meant that she could record things and play them when my sister and I wanted to watch them, because for years we would just beg our mom, please make the TV play Sesame Street. But of course it wasn't 4 o'clock on a weekday afternoon or whatever. So we couldn't watch Sesame Street. We had to wait. And heaven forbid, if we took a nap and missed it, we'd be so upset like the rest of the night. So my mom was so happy she recorded Sesame Street like ad infinitum. I think like 12 episodes. So across like 4 or 5 different VHS tapes so that we could watch it whenever we wanted to. Or more importantly, she could put it on so we'd stop bugging her, But now that was the only show that mom allowed us to do that with because she was a teacher and she knew that Sesame Street was actually educational television. I wanted her to do that with G.I. Joe and He-Man. No, sir. No. But I was able to con my grandmother, my dad's mom, into buying me some commercially released G.I. Joe tapes. So, I got the best of both worlds. Now that was old school, poor white trash 1980s privilege, was that I got my grandmother to buy me VHS tapes of G.I. Joe on cartoon shows. People would come to my house after school to watch my tapes.
I remember in the 8th grade, so this would have been kind of mid-late 90s, I did a report about LeVar Burton. So Geordie LaForge, but
yeah, sure, yes, Geordie LaForge,
the actor, and we had 2 VCRs that were both hooked up to the same television. Yeah,
man, I thought I was privileged. Jeez, 2 VCRs. So, what the heck?
So we programmed one to record Star Trek: The Next Generation, which came on at like noon, but on school day, so we had to program the VCR to start recording. And then we also recorded, and we were able to do this live because Reading Rainbow came on after school, so I was able to press record at the time. And then we also went to the library, rented the VCR tape of Roots.
Oh,
had that playing on one VCR while recording on the other.
Nice. So you created a custom highlight reel for your report, as it were.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
But the weird part was Star Trek was the 3rd one, and I apparently got a season 1 episode because Geordi was piloting the ship and wearing red, which was only in season 1.
Right.
But the VCR didn't pick up audio when we set it to record at a later time. So we have this great scene of Roots, and it's the scene where he's up on the auction block, and they like walk up and they look at his teeth. Very provocative scene. Then we have, Reading Rainbow and, the music with that. And then it cuts to Star Trek and it's just him going.
Pantomiming, driving the Enterprise.
Everybody in the classroom was like, it was great. But yes, that's how old we are. We used VCRs to record things to watch later. There was none of this streaming stuff. And I think we've kind of been spoiled by the streaming stuff.
For sure.
And I think in a way we as a society miss out with the streaming because we know that we can just pick it up whenever. We don't have those water cooler moments of, oh my gosh, did you see what happened last night on this show that you could only watch last night? So everybody was sitting around their television screen at the same time.
Right. I think that the writer's strike and the actor strike might lead us more toward that type of thing again, because people will want it to be something special and out of the ordinary. And right now it's just not. And that detracts from the overall quality.
I think that streaming services have tried to kind of enforce that by going to a once a week format instead of dropping an entire season all at once, so that you have this, Wednesday we're talking about Star Wars, but it doesn't quite work because they release things at like midnight or 3 a.m. and you've got some people like Kevin who watch it at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And then you have us who don't.
Right. Yes, we don't. So I'll be eager to see what Iger decides to change about the production schedule. And we should probably do like a Deadpool where we put up the names of all the Star Wars projects that we know are in the works and take bets on who's going to get cut. Yeah, who's going to get eliminated.
An actual Deadpool, not the Marvel character.
The reason that guy is named Deadpool.
That is true.
Correct. Yes, totally.
So you said we ought to do like a Deadpool. I'm like, I've got one painted around here somewhere.
We should break the fourth wall. That's what I meant. No,
yes.
My wall. Anyway. Okay. So speaking of merchandise and whatnot, what Star Wars t-shirts are we wearing this episode, Nathan?
Well, I had to wear this one because I knew we were going to be talking about Ahsoka. This is Ahsoka riding on the Loth Wolf, the Dave Filoni artwork. I love this shirt. This is from Ashley Eckstein's Her Universe. They make some great shirts over there. Some of the best shirts that I've ever worn. And this is one of them.
Yeah, good times. I am kicking it old school with my WrestleMania 2 shirt. Not WrestleMania, brother, but WrestleMania. As, of course, it is featuring Zam Wessel from Attack of the Clones, Episode 2. This is from Star Wars Celebration a few years ago. I didn't get to go, but friend of the show, Terry Lee, graciously got me one, and I'm so happy because it is a spoof of an actual WrestleMania shirt. So I owned that WrestleMania shirt and this WrestleMania shirt, and it's Star Wars crossing over with professional wrestling, which hardly ever happens, but are my two probably favorite things in the whole fandom universe. So when I saw this promoed on the Star Wars Celebration website, I was like, did they inject nanobots into my brain and read my thoughts to create this merchandise? Because, oh my gosh.
They did. I helped them.
Written all over it. Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that.
No.
You know what? If this was the result, do it again.
Okay.
If you guys out there want to get your own cool What a Piece of Junk t-shirt, please check out our tpublic.com store. You can get a t-shirt from our show, coffee mug, iPad case, mouse pad, whatever. Any merch that you buy, of course, goes to help us continue to make great shows here on the Fandom Podcast Network. And speaking of the FPN, Nathan, please let people know where they can find us on the internet.
You can find us in all sorts of places, even YouTube, where the old people go. You can find us there now, but you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or Google Play. Pretty much anywhere that you get your podcasts, you can find us. You can also find us on Facebook at What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast. You can email us at whatapieceofjunkpod@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at Fandom Podcast Network. We do have a Twitter account, What Wars, that Kevin is currently running. We haven't interacted all that much with Twitter recently, but it does still exist technically.
Yes.
And if you do listen to us on, any of the services that allow you to give us a review, we would love to get a review from you to help us know what we're doing well, what we could be doing better, what you like, what you don't like. And if you leave a 5-star review, that helps other people find our show. So it would be great if you could do that. Also, we don't want Balin showing up and cutting off limbs, telling us that he's no Jedi. Very reminiscent of Ahsoka saying that she's no Jedi, and stabbing us through the heart. So 5-star reviews, I'm not saying that they'll help stop that, but I do know that nobody who's gotten a 5-star review has had that happen. Yeah. So why risk it?
Totally. And Nathan and I do not have enough hate in our heart to continue existing after getting stabbed by a lightsaber, unlike certain other Sith or dark side users. So if he shows up and does that to us, we're toast, you guys. We might be able to come back as blue glowy Force ghosts, but even that probably isn't going to happen because we got other stuff to do in the afterlife.
Yeah, I've never seen a blue Force ghost Wookiee, so I'm not feeling like it's a good chance.
Yeah. So please give us those 5-star reviews. All right. Well, we want to thank you all for joining us for this episode. As always, please hit us up between shows to let us know what we can do, what we can improve, what you want to hear, what you want to hear less of, and so on and so forth. But until next time, please always remember to respect each other and always respect each other's fandom. All right, Nathan, punch it.